The stagecoach door swung open, and Eleanor Hale stepped into the wrong life. She stood alone on frozen ground, watching dust fade where the driver should have stopped 20 miles south. No manor house, no wealthy employer, just wind, mountains, and a single ranch that looked like it had grown from the rocks themselves. The storm was coming fast. She could taste metal in the air. And somewhere in that rough cluster of buildings, a man who didn't know her name was about to become the only thing standing between her and a Montana winter that killed strangers without asking questions first. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The cold came down like a fist. Eleanor felt it through her wool coat, through the layers she'd put on that morning in Bozeman when the sky was still blue and the stagecoach driver was still smiling. That smile was gone now. Everything was gone. The other passengers, the noise, the certainty that she knew where she was going. She turned in a slow circle, her boots crunching on half-frozen mud. The ranch spread out in front of her like something built by necessity rather than ambition. A main house, weathered gray. A barn that leaned slightly to the left. Corrals empty except for 3 horses that watched her with the same suspicion she felt watching them. Smoke rose from a chimney, thin and hesitant, like whoever lit the fire wasn't sure they wanted to be found. No gate, no sign, no name. Eleanor looked down at the paper in her hand, now damp from her grip. The Carlisle Estate, 20 miles south of Forsyth. You'll know it when you see it. 3 stories, white columns, rose garden out front. This was not that. This was barely anything at all. She walked toward the house because there was nowhere else to go. Her trunk sat in the mud behind her, too heavy to carry, too valuable to leave. The wind pushed at her back like it was trying to help, or maybe just trying to get her out of the way before the real weather arrived. The front door opened before she reached it. A woman stood there, older, with gray hair pulled back tight and eyes that didn't waste time on pleasantries. She looked Eleanor up and down like she was livestock being evaluated for purchase. "You lost?" the woman asked. "I think so," Eleanor said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "The stagecoach driver, he said this was the Carlisle place." "It's not." "I know, I can see that now." The woman didn't move from the doorway. Behind her, Eleanor could hear voices, low, male, tired. Someone laughed, short and humorless. "I was supposed to go to the Carlisle Estate," Eleanor continued, hating how much she sounded like she was pleading. 20 miles south. I'm expected there. I'm a governess. They hired me from Boston." "Boston." The woman said it like it was a disease. "Yes. Long way to come for the wrong ranch." It wasn't intentional. The woman finally stepped aside, but only barely. "Storm's coming. You'll freeze if you stand out there explaining yourself. Get in." Eleanor hesitated. She'd been taught better than to walk into strange houses in strange territories with strange people. But she'd also been taught that Montana didn't care about manners, and right now the wind was picking up in a way that made her ears ache. She stepped inside. The house was warm, warmer than she expected. A fire burned in a stone hearth that took up half the wall. The room smelled like coffee and wood smoke and something else, something animal and unfamiliar. 3 men sat at a long table, all of them turning to look at her with the same expression, vague annoyance mixed with curiosity. "Found her on the porch," the woman said, closing the door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Didn't know we were expecting company," one of the men said. He was older, maybe 60, with a beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks. "We're not," the woman replied. "Stagecoach dropped her here by mistake, says she's supposed to be at Carlisle's." That got a reaction. The youngest man, mid-20s, dark hair, shoulders built for work, looked up from his coffee. His face didn't change much, but something shifted in his posture. "Carlisle," he repeated. "That's what she said." He stood slowly, like standing was something that required consideration. When he moved into the light, Eleanor saw him clearly for the first time. Tall, lean in the way men got when they worked too hard and ate too little. His hands were scarred across the knuckles, and there was a bruise along his jaw that looked a few days old. "You got a name?" he asked. "Eleanor Hale." "Jonah Reed." He didn't offer his hand. "That's my mother, Ruth. The old man's my uncle, Samuel. Other one's Davis. He works here." Eleanor nodded to each of them. Ruth was already walking toward the back of the house. Samuel had returned to whatever he'd been doing before she arrived. Davis just stared. Carlisle's place is a day's ride south, Jonah said. Maybe more in this weather. I know. The driver, he must have misunderstood. Or he didn't care. Jonah's voice was flat. No judgment in it, just fact. They don't pay him enough to care. Can I hire someone to take me there? Eleanor looked around the room as if a solution might be sitting in one of the corners. I have money. Not much, but... Storm will hit before sundown, Jonah interrupted. No one's riding anywhere tonight. Maybe not tomorrow either. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. How long? 2 days. 3 if it's bad. I'm expected. They'll worry, Jonah shrugged, a gesture so casual it felt cruel. Can't help what they'll think. Can't change the weather. Ruth reappeared from the back hall, carrying a bundle of blankets. She dropped them on a chair near the fire without ceremony. You can sleep here, she said, nodding toward a small room off the main space. It might have been a study once, or storage. Now it was just empty. There's a cot. It's not soft. That's fine, Eleanor said quickly. I appreciate it, really. I don't want to be an inconvenience. Too late for that, Ruth said, but there was no malice in it, just exhaustion. Jonah walked past Eleanor toward the door, pulling a heavy coat off a hook. I'll bring your trunk in before the mud freezes over it. You don't have to... He was already outside. Eleanor stood there, surrounded by strangers in a house that smelled like survival, and felt the full weight of her mistake settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't the plan. The plan had been simple. Take the job, save money, build a life somewhere clean and predictable. The Carlisle family had written such polite letters. They'd promised a good salary, a private room, children who loved learning. This was none of those things. Ruth handed her a cup of coffee without asking if she wanted it. Drink. You look like you're about to fall over. Eleanor took it, grateful. The coffee was strong enough to taste like punishment, but it was hot, and that was enough. How'd you end up out here? Ruth asked, settling into a chair by the fire. Advertisement in a Boston paper. The Carlisles were looking for a governess. I answered. You come all this way just for a job? I didn't have much reason to stay. Ruth studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that saw through polite answers and into the truth beneath. Family? Gone. Recent? 2 years. Fever took both my parents within a week of each other. Ruth nodded slowly, like that explained something. And you've been doing what since? Teaching at a girls' school in Boston. Room and board included, but no real pay. I wanted something more. Something mine. So you came to Montana. Eleanor almost smiled. It seemed reasonable in the letters. The door opened again, and Jonah came in dragging her trunk like it weighed nothing. He set it down near the small room, water dripping off his coat onto the floor. It's going to get worse tonight, he said to Ruth. I checked the horses. They're fine, but if this keeps up, we'll need to bring in more wood tomorrow. I'll handle it, Samuel said from the table. No, you won't, Jonah replied, not unkindly. Your back's still bothering you. Samuel muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue. Jonah looked at Eleanor then, really looked at her, like he was trying to figure out what kind of problem she was going to be. You know how to work? He asked. The question caught her off guard. Yes, I've worked. I mean real work, cooking, cleaning, animals, not teaching kids their letters. Eleanor felt her spine straighten. I grew up on a farm in Vermont before my father became a clerk. I know how to work. Jonah's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. Maybe respect, maybe just recalibration. Good, he said, because if you're stuck here for a few days, you'll earn your keep. We don't have time for passengers. I wouldn't expect you to. Ruth made a sound that might have been approval. She can help me with the baby tomorrow. Eleanor blinked. Baby? My daughter-in-law just had a son 3 weeks ago. She's still recovering, and I've got more work than hours in the day. You know anything about infants? A little. I helped deliver my cousin's baby a few years back. Then you'll do fine. Jonah was already moving toward the back hallway, done with the conversation. Get some sleep, Miss Hale. Morning comes early here. He disappeared before she could respond. Eleanor stood there holding her coffee, surrounded by strangers who decided her value in under 10 minutes, and realized she didn't even know what she'd agreed to. The cot was exactly as uncomfortable as promised. Eleanor lay on her back, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind howl outside like something alive and angry. The blankets Ruth had given her smelled like cedar and smoke, and they were heavier than anything she'd used in Boston. She tried to sleep. Failed. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. What would the Carlyles think when she didn't arrive? Would they assume she'd changed her mind? Would they hire someone else? She'd signed a contract. What if they held her to it? What if they demanded compensation for breach of agreement? The anxiety sat on her chest like a stone. Somewhere deeper in the house, she heard voices, low, murmuring, too quiet to make out words. Then silence. Then the creak of footsteps on old wood. Eleanor closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly, the way her mother had taught her when the nightmares came after the fever. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Count to 10. She made it to 7 before she heard the baby cry. It wasn't loud, just a thin, reedy sound that cut through the quiet like a needle. It stopped almost immediately, followed by soft shushing and the low hum of a woman's voice. Eleanor sat up, wide awake now. The crying started again, more insistent this time. She shouldn't get involved. This wasn't her house, wasn't her family, wasn't her business. But the crying didn't stop. Eleanor stood, pulled one of the blankets around her shoulders, and stepped into the main room. The fire had burned down to embers, casting everything in deep orange shadow. She could see a door at the far end of the hall, slightly ajar, light spilling through the gap. She walked toward it, barefoot on cold wood, and stopped just outside. Through the crack, she could see a young woman sitting in a rocking chair holding a bundle wrapped in white cloth. The woman looked exhausted, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes, hair falling out of a loose braid. She was trying to get the baby to nurse, but he kept turning his head away, wailing. "Come on, sweetness," the woman whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, just a little." The baby screamed. Eleanor knocked softly on the doorframe. The woman's head snapped up, eyes wide with something close to panic. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I heard crying. I thought maybe I could help." The woman stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "I'm Eleanor," she continued, stepping just inside the room. "The stagecoach dropped me here by mistake. Your mother-in-law, Ruth, she said I could stay until the storm passes." Recognition flickered across the woman's face. "Oh, right. Jonah mentioned something. You must be Clara." She looked down at the baby, helpless. "And this is Thomas. He won't eat. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." Eleanor moved closer, slow and careful, the way you'd approach a spooked horse. "May I?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. Eleanor knelt beside the chair, studying the baby. He was tiny, red-faced, furious. His fists were clenched tight, and his mouth was open in a wail that seemed too big for his body. "How's he been feeding?" Eleanor asked. "Badly. He latches for a few seconds, then pulls away. Sometimes he just screams." "And you?" Clara's face crumpled slightly. "I'm so tired I can barely think." Eleanor reached out and gently adjusted the way Clara was holding Thomas, tilting him slightly so his head was more elevated. "Try now." Clara offered her breast again, and this time Thomas latched, awkward at first, then settling into a rhythm. The relief on Clara's face was immediate and devastating. "How did you—" "My cousin had the same problem," Eleanor said quietly. Her midwife said sometimes they just need a different angle, less air in their bellies that way. Clara let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "Thank you. I thought I was broken. I thought—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Everyone keeps telling me it's natural, that I should just know what to do, but I don't. I really don't." "No one just knows," Eleanor said. "We all figure it out as we go." They sat in silence for a while, the baby nursing, the storm rattling the windows. Eleanor should have gone back to bed, should have left Clara to her privacy. But something kept her there. "Where's your husband?" she asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." "He's in the barn," Clara said, no offense in her voice. "There's a mare about to foal. He's been out there all night. Jonah's with him." "Jonah's his brother?" Clara nodded. "David's the older one, but Jonah runs the place, always has, even when their father was alive. David helps, but his heart's not really in it. He wanted to go to California, work on the railroads. But then we got married, and I got pregnant, and she stopped, looking down at Thomas. Now we're here. Do you like it here? Clara was quiet for a long time. I don't know yet, she finally said. Ask me again in a year. Eleanor smiled at that. Fair enough. Thomas had fallen asleep, his small face relaxed and peaceful. Clara shifted him gently to her shoulder, patting his back in slow circles. You're good at this, she said to Eleanor. Helping, I mean, you must have done it a lot. Not really. I've just watched people who were. Well, you're better at it than I am. You're doing fine. You're just tired. Clara's eyes filled with tears then, sudden, unwanted. I'm so tired I could die. Eleanor reached out and squeezed her hand, gentle but firm. You won't. I promise. You'll sleep eventually, and when you wake up, you'll be a little less tired, and then a little less after that. It gets easier. Does it? I've heard it does. Clara laughed softly, wiping her eyes. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. It's the best I've got. They sat together until Thomas was fully asleep, his breathing soft and even. Then Eleanor helped Clara settle him into a small cradle by the bed, tucking the blanket around him with care. Thank you, Clara whispered. Really? Any time. Eleanor slipped out of the room and back into the cold hallway, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that felt like it was holding its breath. She was halfway back to her cot when she saw him. Jonah stood in the doorway to the main room, still wearing his coat, snow dusting his shoulders. He was watching her. Eleanor froze. Storm's worse than I thought, he said, his voice low enough not to carry. We'll be stuck here at least 3 days, maybe 4. I heard. That a problem for you? Eleanor thought about the Carlyles, about the contract, about everything she'd left behind in Boston to get here. Then she thought about Clara's exhausted face and Thomas's tiny fists and the way this house felt like it was barely held together by stubbornness and will. No, she said. It's not a problem. Jonah nodded once, then turned and walked toward the fire, stripping off his coat and hanging it to dry. Eleanor went back to her cot, lay down, and this time she slept. Morning arrived brutal and bright. Eleanor woke to the sound of boots on wood and the smell of something burning. She sat up, disoriented, and realized the small room was freezing. The fire must have died sometime in the night. She dressed quickly, layering everything she had, and stepped into the main room. Ruth stood at the stove, jabbing at something in a skillet with more aggression than seemed necessary. Samuel sat at the table, eating in silence. Davis was nowhere to be seen, and Jonah was pulling on heavy gloves near the door, his face set in the same unreadable expression he'd worn last night. You're up, Ruth said without looking. Good. I need help with breakfast. Eleanor moved toward the stove automatically, tying her hair back with a ribbon. What are you making? Eggs, bacon, biscuits if I don't burn them? I can handle biscuits. Ruth stepped aside without argument, handing over the flour tin. Don't make them fancy, just make them edible. Eleanor worked quickly, her hands remembering the rhythm even though it had been years. Mix flour, salt, baking powder. Cut in the lard. Add milk slowly until it came together. Pat it out, cut circles, bake. Simple, familiar. She had them in the oven before Ruth finished the eggs. You weren't lying about knowing how to work, Ruth said, grudging approval in her voice. I don't lie. Everyone lies. Not about biscuits. Ruth almost smiled. Jonah came back inside, shaking snow off his hat. Horses are fed, barns secure, but we're going to need more firewood before tonight. I'll get it, Samuel started to say, but Jonah cut him off. I already told you, your back's not healed. It's fine. It's not. They stared at each other for a moment, some old argument playing out in silence. Then Samuel grunted and went back to his breakfast. I can help, Eleanor said. Jonah looked at her like she'd suggested something absurd. You? I'm capable of carrying wood. It's heavy. So am I. Ruth made that sound again, the almost laugh that meant she was entertained but wouldn't admit it. Jonah studied Eleanor for a long moment, then shrugged. Fine. After breakfast. They ate in shifts. First the men, then Ruth and Eleanor, then Clara when she finally emerged from her room looking like she'd barely slept. Thomas was fussing again, and Eleanor took him without asking, bouncing him gently while Clara ate cold eggs with shaking hands. "You're good with him," Jonah said, the first time he'd spoken directly to her since the night before. "He's easy," Eleanor replied, which wasn't true, but felt like the right thing to say. "Clara thinks you're some kind of miracle." "I'm not." "I know, but she's tired enough to believe it anyway." Eleanor looked up at him, surprised by the honesty. Jonah's face was still unreadable, but there was something softer in his eyes, something that looked almost like gratitude. "Your brother should be with her more," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Jonah's expression hardened. "He's doing what he can." "Is he? That's not your business." "You're right. I'm sorry." They stood in tense silence, Thomas wiggling between them, until Ruth called Jonah back to the table. Eleanor handed the baby to Clara and went to check on the biscuits. They were perfect, golden, flaky, exactly the way her mother used to make them. She set them on the table, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the room went quiet in a way that felt like approval. Carrying firewood turned out to be exactly as miserable as Eleanor expected. The woodpile was behind the barn, half buried in snow, and each log felt like it weighed more than the last. Jonah worked in steady silence, stacking pieces in a wheelbarrow and hauling them back to the house. Eleanor did the same, slower, her arms burning with effort. "You don't have to keep up with me," Jonah said after the third trip. "I'm not trying to keep up with you. You're going to hurt yourself. I'm fine." He gave her a look that said he didn't believe her, but he didn't argue. They worked for an hour, maybe more, until Eleanor's hands were numb and her back was screaming. When they finally finished, Jonah nodded toward the house. "Go warm up. I'll finish stacking." I know you can, but you don't have to." Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to prove she wasn't fragile or useless. But her fingers were so cold they'd stopped bending properly, and her pride wasn't worth frostbite. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jonah just nodded and turned back to the woodpile. Inside, Ruth had hot coffee waiting. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup and let the heat sink into her bones. "He's stubborn," Ruth said, watching through the window as Jonah worked. "But he's fair. If he sees you're willing, he'll treat you like you belong." "I don't belong here." "Not yet." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she drank her coffee and said nothing. The day unfolded in slow, exhausting increments. Eleanor helped Ruth with laundry, scrubbing clothes in water so cold it made her knuckles ache. She watched Clara with Thomas, offering small suggestions that seemed to help. She peeled potatoes for dinner, kneaded dough for tomorrow's bread, swept floors that never seemed to stay clean. And through it all, she watched. She watched the way Jonah moved through the ranch like he was part of it, every action deliberate and efficient. She watched the way David avoided eye contact with his wife, guilt written all over his face. She watched Ruth hold everything together with sheer force of will. This wasn't a family, it was a machine, grinding forward because stopping meant death. And somehow, without meaning to, Eleanor had become a gear in that machine. By the time night fell, she was so tired she could barely stand. But when Clara asked if she'd sit with her again while Thomas nursed, Eleanor said yes. They talked about small things, the weather, the ranch, the impossibility of keeping a house warm when the wind never stopped. Clara asked about Boston, and Eleanor told her about the school, about the girls who hated grammar and loved stories, about the way the city smelled like salt and coal smoke. "Do you miss it?" Clara asked. "Sometimes, but not as much as I thought I would." "Why not?" Eleanor looked down at Thomas, sleeping peacefully now, and tried to find the right words. "Because Boston felt like I was waiting for my life to start," she finally said. "And this, whatever this is, it feels like it already has." Clara smiled, sad and knowing. "Be careful. Montana has a way of making you think you belong, right up until it reminds you that you don't." "Is that what happened to you?" "I don't know yet. Ask me in a year." Eleanor laughed softly, and for the first time since stepping off that stagecoach, she felt something close to peace. On the third night, the storm finally broke. Eleanor stood at the window, watching the sky clear and the stars emerge, sharp and cold and endless. Tomorrow, someone would ride to town. Tomorrow, she could get word to the Carlyles. Tomorrow, everything would go back to the plan. But tonight, she stood in a house that wasn't hers, surrounded by people who didn't owe her anything, and felt safer than she had in 2 years. Jonah appeared beside her, silent as always. "Storm's over," he said. "I know. We'll get you to Carlisle's by the end of the week." "I know." They stood together, not quite touching, watching the stars. "Thank you," Eleanor said, "for letting me stay. Didn't have much choice." "You did. You could have turned me away." Jonah was quiet for a long time. Then, "No, I couldn't have." Eleanor looked at him, but his face was turned away, lost in shadow. "Why not?" she asked. He didn't answer, and Eleanor realized, with a certainty that felt like falling, that she didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The road to Carlisle's estate took 4 hours by wagon, and every minute of it felt wrong. Eleanor sat beside Jonah on the bench seat, her trunk rattling behind them, watching the Reed Ranch disappear into the distance. The sky was clear now, almost painfully blue, and the snow had already started melting in patches across the valley. Everything looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less threatening. She'd said goodbye to Ruth that morning, quick and awkward, both of them pretending it meant less than it did. Claire had cried, which surprised Eleanor more than it should have. Even Thomas had fussed when she'd kissed his forehead, like he knew she was leaving. "You don't have to do this," she told Clara. "I'm just going where I was supposed to go in the first place." "I know," Clara had whispered, "but it still feels wrong." Now, sitting beside Jonah as the wagon creaked over frozen ruts, Eleanor couldn't shake the same feeling. "You're quiet," Jonah said, not looking at her. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it is that a week ago I didn't know any of you existed." Jonah's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Strange for us, too." "Is it always like that here? People just appearing?" "No, you're the first stray we've picked up in years." Eleanor looked at him. "Stray. You got a better word for it?" She thought about that. "Guest?" "Guests don't do laundry." Fair point. They rode in silence for a while, the landscape opening up around them. Rolling hills, distant mountains, the kind of emptiness that made you feel small and significant at the same time. Eleanor had read about Montana in newspapers, seen illustrations in magazines, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. The scale, the silence, the way it made Boston feel like something from someone else's life. "You nervous?" Jonah asked. "About meeting the Carlisles?" "Yeah." Eleanor considered lying, then decided against it. "A little. They're expecting someone polished, professional, not someone who shows up a week late covered in ranch dust." "You look fine." "I look like I've been sleeping on a cot and hauling firewood." "Like I said, fine." This time Eleanor did smile, small and involuntary. Jonah caught it from the corner of his eye, and something in his expression softened. "They're lucky to get you," he said quietly, "even if you are late." Eleanor didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The Carlisle estate appeared around noon, exactly as advertised. 3 stories. White columns, a rose garden out front, bare now, but clearly tended with obsessive care. It looked like someone had plucked a Virginia plantation and dropped it into Montana territory, completely out of place and aggressively proud of it. Jonah pulled the wagon to a stop at the front entrance and sat there for a moment, studying the house. "Big," he finally said. "Very." "You sure about this?" Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's still time to change your mind." "And do what? Come back to your ranch and do laundry forever?" Jonah shrugged. "Could do worse." Eleanor felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been keeping carefully closed since the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach. She wanted to tell him that she'd thought about it, that she'd lain awake last night running through scenarios where she didn't get on this wagon, didn't come here, stayed in that small cold room, and made herself useful until useful became necessary. But that was insane. She had a contract, a job, a plan, I'm sure, she said, and hated how uncertain it sounded. Jonah nodded once and climbed down from the wagon. He pulled her trunk out like it weighed nothing and carried it to the front steps. The door opened before Eleanor could knock. A man stood there, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that suggested he smiled often, but not right now. He wore an expensive suit and looked at Jonah the way you'd look at something tracked in on your boot. "Can I help you?" he asked, the question clearly meaning the opposite. Eleanor Hale, Eleanor said quickly, stepping forward. I'm the governess you hired. I apologize for the delay. There was a mix-up with the stagecoach. Miss Hale! The man's expression changed instantly, though not in the way Eleanor expected. Yes, we've been waiting for you. Something in his tone made her stomach tighten. I'm so sorry. The driver dropped me at the wrong ranch, and then the storm hit, and please come inside. He stepped back, gesturing her through the door, but not moving to help with her trunk. Jonah carried it inside without being asked, setting it down in the grand foyer with careful precision. The house was exactly as cold as it looked from the outside, all marble and dark wood and paintings of people who probably never smiled. I'm Richard Carlyle, the man said, still not offering his hand. This is my home. Pleased to meet you, sir. Again, I apologize for... Where exactly were you this past week, Miss Hale? The question came sharp, accusatory. Eleanor blinked. I told you. The stagecoach driver made a mistake. He dropped me at a ranch about 20 miles north of here, the Reed Ranch. The storm made it impossible to travel, so they were kind enough to let me stay until... The Reed Ranch. Carlyle's face hardened. You stayed with those people? Beside her, Eleanor felt Jonah go very still. Yes, she said carefully. They were generous hosts under difficult circumstances. Generous? Carlyle laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's an interesting choice of words. I'm not sure I understand. No, I don't imagine you do. Carlyle turned his attention to Jonah for the first time, and the contempt in his gaze was so naked Eleanor felt embarrassed for him. You can go now. Thank you for delivering her. Jonah didn't move. His jaw was tight, and Eleanor could see his hands flexing at his sides. Jonah, she said quietly. It's all right. Is it? He was looking at Carlyle, not her. Yes, thank you. For everything. Jonah held Carlyle's gaze for another long moment, then turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a sound like a cell locking. Carlyle waited until the wagon had pulled away before speaking again. I assume you're unaware of the situation with the Reed family, he said. What situation? They're squatters, Miss Hale. Thieves. They've been on land I legally own for 3 years, refusing to leave despite multiple warnings and legal notices. Eleanor felt the floor tilt slightly beneath her. I didn't know. Obviously. Otherwise, I doubt you would have accepted their hospitality so readily. They seemed like decent people. Decent people respect property rights and the rule of law. Carlyle moved past her, deeper into the house. Come, we have things to discuss. Eleanor followed him through a series of increasingly ornate rooms until they reached what appeared to be a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, leather furniture, a desk the size of her room at the ranch. He gestured for her to sit. She remained standing. Miss Hale, I want to be clear about something, Carlyle said, settling into a chair behind the desk. The position I offered you came with certain expectations. Punctuality, reliability, discretion. Your arrival a week late demonstrates a failure on all 3 counts. That's not fair. I couldn't control... You could have sent word. There are telegraph lines, riders. You made a choice to remain comfortable while my family was left wondering whether you were dead or had simply changed your mind. I didn't think... No, you didn't. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk and slid it across to her. This is the contract you signed. Have you read it recently? Eleanor picked it up with shaking hands. She'd read it a dozen times in Boston, memorizing every clause, every promise. Now the words seemed to shift and blur on the page. Section 7, Carlyle said. Breach of contract. If the employee fails to arrive at the specified location on the specified date, or fails to fulfill their duties to the satisfaction of the employer, they are liable for damages, including but not limited to lost wages, replacement costs, and any financial harm caused by their absence. I was here, Eleanor said, her voice rising. I was 20 miles away, stuck in a storm. And yet you weren't here, in this house, where you were needed. No one could have traveled in that weather. The stagecoach driver managed to continue south after leaving you. He arrived here on schedule and informed us of his error. We sent riders to retrieve you. They found the Reed Ranch empty except for an old man who claimed ignorance of your whereabouts. Eleanor's mind raced. Samuel, They must have come while she was helping Clara, or hauling wood, or any of 100 moments when she'd been too busy to notice riders approaching. I was there, she insisted. They must have missed me. Or perhaps the Reeds deliberately concealed you to cause me inconvenience. That's absurd. Is it? These people have been trying to undermine my claim to that land for years. What better way than to intercept my employee and turn her against me before she even arrives? Eleanor felt something cold and sharp settle in her stomach. You think they kept me there on purpose? I think it's a possibility worth considering. They fed me, sheltered me, asked for nothing in return. How noble of them. Carlyle stood and walked to the window, his back to her. Miss Hale, I'm going to be frank with you. The children need a governess. You came highly recommended from Boston. I would prefer to honor our contract and have you begin work immediately. But I need to know that you understand the situation here. The Reeds are not your friends. They are criminals squatting on land that belongs to me. If you have developed some misguided loyalty to them during your brief stay, I need to know now. Eleanor stared at the back of his head, her mind spinning. Nothing he said matched what she'd experienced. Ruth's exhausted kindness, Clara's desperate gratitude, Jonah's quiet protection. None of it felt like manipulation, but she'd only been there a week, and this man owned half the territory. I have no loyalty to them, she heard herself say. The words tasted like metal. Good. Carlyle turned back around and his face was pleasant again, almost warm. Then we can put this unpleasantness behind us. I'll have Mrs. Brennan show you to your room. The children are eager to meet you. We'll begin tomorrow morning, and we can all pretend the last week never happened. Eleanor nodded, numb. A woman appeared in the doorway as if summoned, middle-aged, stern, dressed in black. Mrs. Brennan, presumably. She led Eleanor up 2 flights of stairs to a small but comfortable room in the east wing. The window looked out over the rose garden and the valley beyond. Dinner is at 6, Mrs. Brennan said. You'll eat with the family tonight. After that, you'll take your meals with the children unless Mr. Carlyle requests otherwise. Thank you. Mrs. Brennan left without another word. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, soft, so much softer than the cot at the ranch, and tried to remember why she'd wanted this. The money, the independence, the chance to build something that was hers. It all felt very far away now. She unpacked her trunk slowly, hanging her 2 good dresses in the wardrobe, placing her books on the shelf by the window. Everything had a place here. Everything was ordered, clean, predictable. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a cage. Dinner was excruciating. The Carlyle family consisted of Richard, his wife Victoria, and their 3 children, Margaret, age 12, William, age 9, and Charlotte, age 6. They sat at a table that could have seated 20, eating food prepared by people Eleanor never saw, and made conversation that sounded like it had been rehearsed. Margaret asked Eleanor about Boston with the kind of polite disinterest that suggested she'd been told to ask. William said nothing, focused entirely on cutting his meat into identical squares. Charlotte stared at Eleanor with open suspicion. Miss Hale will be starting lessons tomorrow, Victoria said, smiling at her children. I expect you all to be on your best behavior. Yes, Mama, they chorused. Eleanor tried to smile back, tried to feel some excitement about the work she'd come here to do. These were good children, probably. Smart, well-fed. They had access to books and music and everything she dreamed of providing to students, but all she could think about was Thomas's angry little fists and Clara's exhausted tears and the way Ruth had said, "You're doing fine," like it was both criticism and praise. Miss Hale, are you all right? Victoria asked. You look pale. I'm fine, just tired from the journey. Of course. Richard told me about your ordeal with those squatters. Eleanor's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. They were very kind. Kind. Victoria dabbed at her lips with a napkin. Well, it's generous of you to say so. Richard cut in smoothly. My wife has strong feelings about the Reed situation. We lost a significant investment when they refused to vacate the property. What kind of investment? Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. We'd planned to build a grist mill on their land. The water rights alone were worth thousands, but they've contested our claim at every turn, filing endless petitions and appeals. It's been enormously costly, not to mention frustrating. Eleanor set down her fork carefully. They said the land belonged to them. The table went very quiet. I'm sure they did, Richard said, his voice pleasant but with an edge underneath. Squatters always have very convincing stories about why they deserve what isn't theirs. Eleanor wanted to argue, wanted to ask how he could be so certain, wanted to demand proof. But she was sitting in this man's house, eating his food, under contract to raise his children. So she said nothing. After dinner, she excused herself and went back to her room. She tried to read but couldn't focus, tried to sleep but lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. At some point past midnight, she got up and went to the window. From here she could see north, toward the mountains, toward the Reed Ranch, invisible in the darkness. She thought about Jonah standing beside her in the starlight, saying, I couldn't have, when she thanked him for letting her stay. She thought about Ruth's almost smile when the biscuits came out perfect. She thought about Clara saying, ask me in a year, like survival was something you earned day by day. And she thought about Richard Carlisle's face when he called them criminals. Someone was lying. Eleanor just didn't know who. The next morning started with bells. Eleanor woke to the sound of them clanging through the house. Not church bells, but something harsher, more insistent. She dressed quickly and found Mrs. Brennan in the hallway, looking grim. What's happening? Eleanor asked. Fire in the south pasture. Mr. Carlyle wants everyone accounted for. They gathered in the foyer, family, staff, everyone. Richard stood in the center, already dressed for riding, his face dark with fury. How bad? Victoria asked. Bad enough. The shepherders' cottage is gone. 300 yards of fence line. Could have been the whole pasture if the wind had been different. Did someone see how it started? Richard's eyes flicked to Eleanor, then away. We have our suspicions. The meaning was clear. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. You think the Reeds did this? I think the timing is interesting. You arrive here. They know you're working for me now, and suddenly I have a fire? That doesn't make sense. Why would they? Revenge, Miss Hale. Intimidation. These people don't think like civilized human beings. One of the ranch hands came in then, hat in his hands, looking nervous. Sir, we found tracks leading north from the burn site. How many riders? 2, maybe 3. Hard to tell. Richard nodded slowly, like this confirmed something. Postguards on the property line. No one from that ranch sets foot on my land, and if they try... He stopped, looked at his wife and children, and moderated his tone. If they try, you send for the sheriff. The staff dispersed. The family went back to breakfast. And Eleanor stood in the foyer feeling like the ground had opened beneath her feet. She spent the morning trying to focus on lessons. Margaret was bright but bored. William was anxious and perfectionist. Charlotte was 6 and had the attention span of a sparrow. They were fine children, normal children. Eleanor taught them anyway, going through the motions, hearing herself explain grammar and arithmetic and geography while her mind spun in circles. At lunch, Mrs. Brennan brought news that the sheriff had been called, that witnesses had been found, that everything pointed to arson, deliberate and targeted. At dinner, Richard announced he was pursuing legal action against the Reed family, that they would pay for the damage, that this was the final straw. And Eleanor sat there, pushing food around her plate, thinking about Jonah's careful hands stacking firewood and Ruth's tired eyes and David's guilty avoidance of his wife. None of it fit. That night she couldn't sleep again. She paced her room, wore a path in the carpet, tried to talk herself into believing Richard's version of events. Failed. At 2 a.m, she made a decision. She dressed in her plainest clothes, pulled on her heavy coat, and slipped out of the house through the kitchen door. The night was cold but clear, and she knew the direction north. Knew approximately how far. Knew it was insane to walk 20 miles in the dark. Did it anyway. She made it 3 miles before the rider found her. Eleanor heard the horse before she saw it. Hoofbeats on frozen ground, fast and purposeful. She turned, heart hammering, and saw a dark shape resolving out of the darkness. Jonah. He pulled up beside her, looking down from the saddle with an expression somewhere between anger and disbelief. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Walking." "I can see that." "Walking where?" "To your ranch." "In the middle of the night." "Yes." Jonah stared at her for a long moment, then dismounted in one fluid motion. You're going to freeze. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're 3 miles from Carlisle's house with no horse, no supplies, and no sense. Eleanor felt something hot rise in her chest. I need to know if you did it. Did what? The fire. Did you burn his pasture? Jonah went very still. In the moonlight, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. No, he said quietly. The tracks weren't ours. How do I know that? Because I'm telling you. And I'm supposed to just believe you? Yeah, you are. They stood facing each other in the frozen dark, breath misting between them. He said you're squatters, Eleanor said. He said the land is his. He's wrong. He has legal documents. So do we. Then why haven't you shown them to the court? Jonah's jaw tightened. We have. Multiple times. Carlisle has more money than we do, better lawyers, the kind of influence that makes judges see things his way. That's not how the law works. That's exactly how it works out here. You know that, or you should by now. Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, frustration and confusion and exhaustion all mixing together. I don't know what to believe. Then believe this. Jonah stepped closer, and his voice dropped. My father filed that claim in 1867, before Carlisle ever set foot in Montana. We have the original documents signed and witnessed. We've paid taxes on that land for 17 years. We've built everything we have from dirt and sweat and stubbornness, and we're not leaving because some rich man decided he wants what's ours. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because it wasn't your problem before. And now it is? Now you're standing in the dark asking me if I'm an arsonist, so yeah, now it is. Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite her coat. I signed a contract with him. I know. I can't just walk away. I know that too. Then why are you here? Jonah looked at her for a long time, and something in his expression cracked. Because when I heard you'd left your room in the middle of the night, I thought... He stopped, shook his head. Doesn't matter what I thought. Tell me. I thought you were in trouble, and I couldn't... He stopped again, the words seeming to stick in his throat. Eleanor's heart was beating too fast. Couldn't what? Couldn't let that happen. The silence between them felt enormous, weighted with everything neither of them was saying. He's going to pursue legal action, Eleanor said finally. Against your family. He says you owe him for damages. Let him try. Jonah, he has money, influence. You said it yourself, the courts favor him. Then we'll lose in court, won't be the first time. And then what? He takes the land? Maybe. Or maybe we find another way. Eleanor wanted to ask what that meant, but she was afraid of the answer. You should go back, Jonah said, before someone realizes you're gone. I can't work for him, not if he's lying about you. You don't know that he is. Don't I? Jonah reached out like he might touch her arm, then pulled back. Eleanor, you need that job. You need the money, the security, all of it. Don't throw it away because of us. What if I want to? Then you're not as smart as I thought you were. It should have stung. Instead, it almost made her laugh. I'll take you back, Jonah said, moving toward his horse. But you're riding. I'm not letting you walk 17 more miles in the dark. Eleanor let him help her up into the saddle, then felt him swing up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and she could feel the heat of him through both their coats. They rode in silence, the horse picking its way carefully over uneven ground. Eleanor leaned back slightly, just enough to feel solid and real and safe. I believe you, she said quietly. About the land, about the fire, all of it. She felt more than heard his exhale. Good, but I don't know what to do with that. You'll figure it out. You're good at figuring things out. How do you know? Because you fixed Clara's baby in 5 minutes after watching her struggle for 3 weeks. Because you hauled firewood until your hands bled and didn't complain once. Because you're here. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling something settle in her chest that had been loose and rattling since the moment she'd walked into Carlisle's house. When they reached the edge of the Carlisle property, Jonah pulled the horse to a stop. You can walk from here, he said. Less chance of someone seeing us together. Eleanor slid down from the saddle, stumbling slightly. Jonah dismounted after her, steadying her with one hand on her elbow. Thank you, she said. For what? For coming after me. For telling me the truth. For... She stopped, not sure how to finish. Jonah's hand was still on her arm, warm through the fabric of her coat. In the darkness, she couldn't see his face clearly, but she could feel him looking at her. Be careful, he said. Carlisle's not stupid. If he figures out you're questioning him. I know. I mean it, Eleanor. He's dangerous when he's crossed. I'll be careful. Jonah nodded and stepped back, breaking contact. There's a town meeting next week, in Forsyth. They're looking for a teacher for the school there. The last one left to get married. If things don't work out with Carlisle, you're telling me to leave him? I'm telling you there are options, that's all. Eleanor felt something warm spread through her chest, fragile and terrifying. Would I see you if I took that job? Maybe, if you wanted to. I would want to. The words hung between them, simple and impossibly complicated. Jonah mounted his horse in one smooth motion, looking down at her. Town meeting's Tuesday, 7 o'clock. Think about it. Then he was gone, hoofbeats fading into the darkness. Eleanor stood there for a long time, watching the space where he'd disappeared, before turning and walking back toward the house. She slipped in through the kitchen door, crept up the back stairs, and made it to her room without being seen. Only then did she let herself shake. Only then did she let herself think about what she'd just done, what she was considering, what it would mean to walk away from everything she'd planned. She sat on the edge of her soft bed and thought about hard cots and crying babies and coffee that tasted like punishment. She thought about Jonah saying, I couldn't have, and meaning it. And she thought about Tuesday at 7 o'clock and a town that needed a teacher, and the terrifying possibility that she might actually be brave enough to choose it. The lie came easier than Eleanor expected. Tuesday morning, she told Victoria she needed to visit the general store in Forsyth for teaching supplies. Margaret needed new slate pencils, William had torn his geography workbook, and Charlotte required picture cards for alphabet practice. All true, technically. Just not the whole truth. Victoria barely looked up from her embroidery. Take the small buggy. Have Henderson drive you. Be back before dark. Henderson was the ranch foreman, a man of maybe 40, with a scar across his cheek and the personality of a fence post. He drove Eleanor into town without speaking, deposited her at the general store, and told her he'd be back at 5. I need the whole day, Eleanor said. There's quite a bit to purchase. Henderson shrugged like it made no difference to him and left her standing on the wooden sidewalk. Forsyth was smaller than Eleanor had imagined from Carlisle's descriptions. One main street, maybe 20 buildings, most of them looking like a strong wind could knock them flat. But there was a bank, a hotel, a livery stable, and a squat brick building with Town Hall painted across the front in letters that had once been white. Eleanor bought the supplies first, establishing her alibi. Then she sat in the general store's back room with a cup of terrible coffee and waited for 7 o'clock. The wait felt endless. She watched people come and go through the store's dusty window. Cowboys. Miners. A few women in dresses that had seen better days. Everyone moved with purpose, like standing still was something they couldn't afford. At 6:30, she couldn't wait anymore. The town hall was already half full when she arrived. Rough benches lined up in rows, most of them occupied by men in work clothes and women with tired eyes. At the front of the room, a man with white hair and a badge on his vest was arranging papers on a makeshift podium. Eleanor slipped into a back row and tried to make herself invisible. She didn't see Jonah anywhere. The white-haired man called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. All right, folks, we've got business to cover, so let's keep this moving. First item, the school situation. A woman in the front row stood up. She was maybe 35, sturdy built, with the kind of face that suggested she didn't tolerate nonsense. We've been without a teacher for 6 weeks now. The children are falling behind. We need to make a decision. Agreed, the white-haired man said. Anyone have candidates? Silence. The woman tried again. We've posted notices in 3 counties. We've written to the Territorial Education Board. No one wants to come out here for what we can pay. How much can we pay? Someone asked. $30 a month, plus room and board. More silence. Eleanor did quick math in her head. It was less than half what Carlisle was paying her, but it came with freedom, and right now that felt like it might be worth more than money. What about that girl who came through last month? A man called out. The one from Illinois? Took one look at the schoolhouse and got back on the stagecoach, the woman replied. Said she wasn't going to teach in a building with rats. A few people laughed, but it sounded forced. The rats are gone now, someone else offered. Mostly. The door at the back of the hall opened, and Jonah walked in. Eleanor's heart did something complicated. He scanned the room, found her in the back row, and something in his face eased. He made his way toward her, ignoring the looks from people who clearly knew who he was, and sat down beside her without asking permission. "You came," he said quietly. "I said I would." "I know, but still." They sat in silence for a moment, close enough that Eleanor could feel the warmth of him through the space between them. Up front, the discussion was deteriorating into argument. Someone suggested lowering standards and hiring anyone who could read. Someone else said that was how you ended up with worse problems than no teacher at all. The sturdy woman was getting red in the face. "We need someone educated," she insisted. "Someone who knows what they're doing." "We need someone willing to stay," the white-haired man countered. "Education doesn't matter if they leave after 2 weeks." Eleanor felt Jonah shift beside her. She looked at him and saw something complicated working across his face. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking, don't." "I'm not thinking anything. You're a terrible liar." Eleanor almost smiled. Then she stood up. The room went quiet so fast she could hear her own heartbeat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying farther than she'd intended. "I'm Eleanor Hale. I'm a certified teacher from Boston. I've been working as a governess here in the territory, but I'm interested in the position at the school." The sturdy woman's eyes went wide. "You're qualified?" "I taught at the Pemberton Academy for Girls for 3 years. Before that, I completed the normal school program at—" "Where are you working now?" the white-haired man interrupted. Eleanor hesitated. This was the moment, the point where she either committed or retreated. "The Carlisle estate," she said, "but I'm prepared to give notice if you'll have me." The reaction was immediate and complicated. Some faces lit up with hope, others darkened with suspicion, and a few, including the white-haired man, went very carefully neutral. "The Carlisle estate," he repeated slowly. "That's quite a change." "I'm aware." "Mr. Carlisle know you're here?" "Not yet." "That going to be a problem?" Eleanor thought about Richard's face when he talked about the Reeds, about Victoria's dismissive tone, about the contract she'd signed that probably had some clause about competing employment. "It might be," she admitted, "but that's my problem, not yours." The sturdy woman looked at the white-haired man. "Ben, we need a teacher. She's qualified, she's here, and she's willing. What else are we waiting for?" Ben, the white-haired man, rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Miss Hale, I'm the mayor of this town, such as it is. I'm also the one who has to deal with Richard Carlisle when he gets upset about something, and he will get upset about this." "I understand." "Do you? Because Carlisle doesn't like losing things he considers his, and he'll consider you his until that contract says otherwise. The contract can be broken. There are provisions with penalties, I'm guessing." Eleanor nodded. "Financial penalties, which I'll pay." "With what money?" She didn't have an answer for that. Beside her, Jonah stood up. "I'll cover it." Every head in the room turned toward him. "You," Ben said flatly. "Me." "Jonah, you're already on Carlisle's bad side. You want to make it worse?" "Don't much care what side I'm on. Miss Hale needs help breaking that contract. I'll help." "Why?" Ben's voice was sharp now, suspicious. Jonah's jaw tightened. "Because she's a good teacher and this town needs one. That reason enough?" The two men stared at each other, and Eleanor could feel the weight of something she didn't fully understand. Old tensions, old arguments, the kind of history that small towns held on to like grudges. "It's not about the money," Eleanor said, trying to pull the focus back. "I'll figure that out. The question is whether you want me for the position." The sturdy woman stood up. "I'm Sarah Mitchell. I've got 4 children who've been sitting idle for 6 weeks. Far as I'm concerned, you're hired. We can put it to a vote if Ben needs the formality, but my vote's yes." "Mine too," someone called from the middle rows. "And mine," another voice added. Ben held up his hands. All right. All in favor of offering Miss Hale the teaching position, say aye." The chorus of ayes was loud enough to rattle the windows. "Opposed?" Silence. Ben looked at Eleanor with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. Congratulations, Miss Hale. You're the new school teacher. Job starts next Monday. Room and board will be with the Mitchells until we can arrange something more permanent, and may heaven help you when Carlisle finds out. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight since the moment she'd stepped into Carlisle's house. Thank you, she said. Sarah Mitchell came over immediately, shaking Eleanor's hand with enough force to make her wince. You won't regret this. The children are good kids. Little wild, maybe, but good. I'm sure they're wonderful. I didn't say wonderful, I said good. Sarah grinned. Come by tomorrow and I'll show you the schoolhouse. It's not much, but it's got 4 walls and a roof that only leaks in 2 places. Eleanor laughed, surprised by how genuine it felt. The meeting continued, moving on to other business. Fence disputes, water rights, a proposal to build a new livery stable. Eleanor barely heard any of it. She was too busy trying to process what she'd just done. She'd quit a paying position with a wealthy family to teach in a building with rats and a leaking roof for half the salary. She'd committed to breaking a legal contract she probably couldn't afford to break. She'd thrown away everything practical and sensible and safe, and she felt better than she had in weeks. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out into the cool evening air. Sarah caught Eleanor's arm on the way out. You got a way back to Carlisle's tonight? The ranch foreman is picking me up at 5. I'm late. He'll wait. They always do. Sarah glanced at Jonah, who was standing a few feet away talking quietly with Ben. You two know each other? I stayed at his family's ranch when the stagecoach made a mistake. Before I got to Carlisle's. Ah. Sarah's expression suggested she understood more than Eleanor had said. The Reeds are good people. Don't let anyone tell you different. I won't. Sarah squeezed her arm once and headed off into the darkness, calling to her husband. Eleanor found herself standing alone with Jonah in the pool of light from the town hall's windows. Around them, the street was emptying, people heading home to suppers and chores and whatever came next. That was stupid, Jonah said. Which part? All of it. You just made an enemy out of the richest man in the territory. I know. And you did it anyway. Yes. Jonah shook his head, but he was almost smiling. You're going to fit in here just fine. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. You really didn't have to offer to pay the contract penalty. I know. I can't let you do that. We'll argue about it later. Jonah nodded toward the street. Come on, I'll walk you back to the store. Your foreman's probably wondering where you disappeared to. They walked slowly, neither of them in a hurry. The street was quieter now, just the sound of their boots on packed dirt and the distant noise from the saloon. What do you think Carlisle will do? Eleanor asked. When I give notice? Nothing good. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be reassuring. Was meant to be honest. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter against the wind. Will he try to stop me? Legally, I mean? Probably. He'll threaten at least. Maybe file suit. Depends how vindictive he's feeling. And if he does? Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then we'll deal with it. Ben's got connections. Sarah's husband used to be a lawyer before he came out here. You're not alone in this. I barely know these people. Doesn't matter. You're one of them now. That's how it works in towns like this. They reached the general store just as Henderson pulled the buggy around front. He gave Jonah a long, suspicious look, but didn't say anything. Eleanor climbed up into the seat, settling her packages beside her. She looked down at Jonah, backlit by the store's lamplight, and felt something shift in her chest that felt dangerous and necessary all at once. Thank you, she said, for coming tonight. For everything. Don't thank me yet. This is about to get complicated. I know. And you're still doing it? I am. Jonah nodded slowly like he was accepting something he'd been fighting against. Then I'll see you Monday. At the school. You're coming to the school? Someone needs to fix that roof before it falls on your head. Eleanor felt herself smile, wide and involuntary. I'd appreciate that. Henderson made an impatient noise and snapped the reins. The buggy lurched forward, and Eleanor had to grab the seat to keep from tumbling backward. And Eleanor. She looked back once and saw Jonah still standing there, watching her leave. Then the darkness swallowed him, and she was alone with Henderson's disapproval and the long ride back to a house she'd already decided to leave. The confrontation came faster than expected. Eleanor barely made it through breakfast the next morning before Richard Carlisle appeared in the schoolroom doorway. his face carved from stone. "Miss Hale, a word, now." The children looked up from their primers, wide-eyed. "Class," Eleanor said calmly, "please continue with page 43. I'll return shortly." She followed Carlyle into his study and closed the door. He didn't offer her a seat. "I received an interesting report this morning," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "From one of my men who happened to be in Forsyth last night. He tells me you attended the town meeting." Eleanor's stomach dropped, but she kept her face neutral. "I did." "And offered to take the teaching position there?" "Yes." Carlyle's control cracked. "Have you lost your mind? You're under contract, my contract. You can't simply decide to work elsewhere because you've taken some misguided fancy to small-town life." "I can break the contract. It has provisions. Provisions that will cost you 6 months' salary as penalty. Money I know you don't have." Eleanor lifted her chin. "I'll find it." "Will you? From where?" "The pathetic town can't pay you enough to cover it, and no bank will loan to a woman with no assets." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "You're trapped, Miss Hale. The sooner you accept that, the better." "I'm not trapped. I'm employed. There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing." Eleanor felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. "Then perhaps you should change where you're standing." Carlyle straightened slowly, and the expression on his face made her take a step back. "You think you're very clever," he said. "Coming out here with your Boston education and your pretty manners, thinking you can just do whatever you please. But this is my territory, Miss Hale. My land, my town, my rules. And if you try to break this contract, I will make you regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. I will pursue every legal remedy available. I will sue you for breach of contract, for damages, for theft of my children's educational time. I will make sure every school in this territory knows what you did. You'll never teach again." Eleanor's hands were shaking, but she forced her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool with principles, and I won't work for a man who threatens people for making their own choices." Carlyle's smile was cruel. "Principles don't pay bills, Miss Hale, and when you're destitute and desperate, you'll come crawling back, they always do. I won't." "We'll see." He walked past her and threw open the door. "You have until tomorrow morning to reconsider. After that, I'll assume you're choosing the difficult path and I'll act accordingly. The children are waiting for you." Eleanor stood in his study for a long moment after he left, trying to get her breathing under control. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd known he would be angry. She'd expected threats, maybe legal action, but she hadn't expected the venom, the absolute certainty that he owned her, that she was his to control, and she hadn't expected how good it would feel to tell him no. She went back to the schoolroom and finished the day's lessons on autopilot, her mind spinning through scenarios and consequences. That night, she wrote out her formal letter of resignation, citing the contract's breach clause and offering to pay the penalty in installments. It felt like signing her own prison sentence. The next morning, she handed the letter to Carlyle at breakfast. He read it once, slowly, then set it down beside his coffee cup. "Very well," he said, his voice perfectly controlled. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the accounting. You'll owe me $300. Payment due in full within 30 days, or I begin legal proceedings." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. $300. She'd been expecting maybe half that. The contract specifies 6 months' salary plus damages. Your salary was $40 per month. That's $240. The additional $60 covers the cost of finding and hiring your replacement, plus compensation for the disruption to my children's education. That's not what the contract... Take it up with my lawyer if you disagree. I'm sure the courts will be very interested in your interpretation. He picked up his newspaper, dismissing her. You have until the end of the week to vacate the premises. After that, I'll consider you trespassing. Eleanor walked out of that house 3 hours later with her trunk on the back of a borrowed wagon and $37 to her name. Sarah Mitchell met her at the schoolhouse, took one look at her face, and wrapped her in a hug that smelled like bread dough and determination. "How bad?" Sarah asked. $300 due in 30 days. Sarah whistled low. "That's rough. That's impossible." "Maybe not." Sarah stepped back, hands on Eleanor's shoulders. "Listen to me. We're going to figure this out. This town takes care of its own, and you're one of us now. Understand? Eleanor wanted to believe her, wanted to feel the same certainty that radiated from Sarah's solid frame, but all she could think about was $300 in 30 days, and the absolute certainty that she'd just destroyed her entire future for a leaking schoolhouse and $30 a month. The school itself was worse than advertised. Eleanor stood in the doorway Friday morning, taking inventory. One room, maybe 20 feet square. A wood stove in the corner that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Benches that wobbled. A teacher's desk with 3 legs and a stack of books holding up the 4th corner. Windows so dirty they barely let in light. And at the back, clear evidence that Sarah hadn't been joking about the rats. "It's not much," Sarah said apologetically, "but it's yours." Eleanor set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "Then let's make it better." They worked all day, scrubbing, sweeping, patching holes in the walls with whatever materials they could find. Sarah's husband showed up around noon with wood planks to fix the benches. 2 other women came by with curtains and cleaning supplies. And around 3 o'clock, Jonah arrived with his tools and a ladder. He climbed onto the roof without greeting anyone and started hammering. Eleanor stood in the schoolyard, watching him work against the sky, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for days. "That boy's got it bad," Sarah said beside her. Eleanor jumped. "What?" "Jonah. He's been watching you like you're the only thing in the territory worth looking at. He's just being helpful. Honey, I've known Jonah Reed since he was 10 years old. He doesn't do helpful unless there's a reason, and you're his reason." Eleanor felt her face flush. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Sarah smiled knowingly. "Well, either way, that roof will be fixed by sundown, and that's one less thing to worry about." They worked until dark, transforming the schoolhouse from abandoned to almost functional. It still wasn't pretty, but it was clean, and the benches didn't wobble anymore, and the roof would probably hold through the next storm. Eleanor walked through it alone after everyone left, running her hand over the teacher's desk, imagining the children who would sit here Monday morning. This was hers, not borrowed, not conditional, not dependent on anyone's approval. Hers. The door opened behind her, and Jonah came in, wiping his hands on his pants. "Roof's done," he said. "Should be good for a few years at least." "Thank you, really. I don't know how to—" "Don't." He crossed the room to her, and there was something in his face she couldn't read. "Eleanor, about the contract penalty. I can't let you pay it. I know that's what you think. It's not what I think. It's what's true. I made this choice. I have to live with it." Jonah was quiet for a moment, studying her. $300 is a lot of money. "I'm aware. You have a plan for getting it?" "Not yet, but I'll figure something out." "What if you don't?" Eleanor felt panic spike in her chest, but she pushed it down. "Then Carlisle sues me. I lose, and I spend the rest of my life paying it off, but at least I'll be doing it on my own terms." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's my suicide." Jonah made a frustrated noise and turned away, pacing to the window. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Good. I'll need that here." He turned back to her, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "I have money. Not a lot, but enough. Let me loan it to you. You can pay me back whenever—" "No." "Eleanor." "I said no." She moved closer to him, needing him to understand. "This is my fight, Jonah. Mine. And if I let you fight it for me, then I'm just trading one person's control for another's. I need to stand on my own." "Even if it destroys you?" Even then, they stood facing each other in the dim schoolhouse, and Eleanor could see the war playing out across Jonah's face. The need to protect versus the need to respect. The desire to help versus the understanding that some battles had to be fought alone. "You're going to drive me crazy," he finally said. "Probably. And you're not going to change your mind?" "No." Jonah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face, rough and warm and gentle. "Then I guess I'll just have to be here to watch you fall," he said quietly, "and help you up when you're ready." Eleanor leaned into his touch, just for a moment, allowing herself this one small comfort. "What if I'm never ready?" "Then I'll wait anyway." The kiss happened slowly, carefully, like something they'd both been moving toward since the moment she'd stepped off that stagecoach into the wrong life. His lips were warm despite the cold. His hand on her face was steady. And when Eleanor kissed him back, it felt like every choice she'd made in the last 2 weeks had been leading to exactly this moment. When they finally pulled apart, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. "That was stupid," he said. "Which part?" "All of it. Carlisle finds out about this. He'll use it against you. Make it look like you left his employment for me, like you're some kind of... I don't care what he makes it look like." "You should, but I don't." Jonah pulled back enough to look at her properly. "You're really not afraid of him, are you?" "I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of living the rest of my life safe and small and under someone else's control." Something fierce and proud flickered across Jonah's face. "Then I guess we're both in trouble." "Looks like it." They stood together in the cold schoolhouse, neither of them moving to leave, and Eleanor thought about what Sarah had said. That Montana made you think you belonged right up until it reminded you that you didn't. But standing here with Jonah's arms around her in her own schoolhouse waiting for Monday morning, Eleanor thought maybe she'd already found her place. The reminder came Sunday night. Eleanor was staying with the Mitchells, sleeping in a small room off the kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and wood smoke. She'd spent the day preparing lessons, organizing books, trying to calm the nerves that jumped in her stomach every time she thought about facing a classroom full of children who probably knew more about Montana than she ever would. The knock came just after dark. Sarah answered it, and Eleanor heard raised voices from the kitchen. She came out to find a man in a suit standing in the doorway, holding an envelope. "Eleanor Hale?" he asked. "Yes." He handed her the envelope. "You've been served. Court date is 3 weeks from today in Helena. Be there or judgment will be entered against you by default." Then he was gone. Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a formal legal complaint, typed on expensive paper, accusing her of breach of contract, willful damages, and theft of services. Carlisle was suing for $500. 500, not 300. 500. "He can't do that," Sarah said, reading over her shoulder. "That's not what he told you. He can do whatever he wants. He's got lawyers. I've got nothing." Sarah's husband, a quiet man named Thomas, took the papers and read them carefully. His face got darker with every line. "This is intimidation," he said finally. "Half these charges won't hold up in court, but he's counting on you not being able to afford to fight them." "He's right," Eleanor said. "I can't." "Then we find you a lawyer." "With what money?" Thomas looked at Sarah, and something passed between them. "We'll figure it out, but you're not facing this alone." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the same determination that burned in both their faces. But all she could think about was $500 in 3 weeks and the absolute certainty that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. That night, lying in the small room off the kitchen, Eleanor let herself cry for the first time since leaving Carlisle's house. She cried for her parents, who'd taught her to be brave and independent, but hadn't lived long enough to see whether those lessons would save her or destroy her. She cried for the girl she'd been in Boston, so certain that a contract and a plan would be enough to build a life on. And she cried for the woman she was becoming, who'd chosen principle over safety, and might pay for that choice with everything she had. Somewhere across the valley, Jonah was probably sleeping in his cold ranch house, unaware that the woman he'd kissed in the schoolhouse was falling apart in a borrowed bed. And somewhere in Helena, Richard Carlisle was probably smiling, certain that he'd won before the fight had even started. Eleanor pulled the blanket over her head and tried to remember why she'd thought she was strong enough for this. The answer didn't come. Morning came anyway, indifferent to Eleanor's tears. She woke with swollen eyes and a headache that felt like her skull was splitting, but the children would be arriving in 2 hours and self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She washed her face in cold water, pinned her hair back with shaking hands, and walked to the schoolhouse before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. The building looked smaller in daylight, more fragile, like a strong wind could blow it apart. Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped inside. Someone had been here already. There was fresh wood stacked by the stove and a basket on her desk covered with a cloth. She lifted it and found bread, still warm, and a jar of preserves with a note in Sarah's handwriting. "First day. You'll be fine. We believe in you." Eleanor sat down at the wobbly desk, and put her head in her hands. She wasn't fine. She was drowning. But the children didn't need to know that. They started arriving at 8:30. First came Sarah's four, 2 boys and 2 girls, stair-stepped in age from 6 to 12. All of them watching Eleanor with the kind of curiosity usually reserved for circus animals. Then a handful of others, some barefoot despite the cold, some in clothes that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to identify. By 9 o'clock, she had 17 students crammed into a space meant for maybe 12, ranging in age from 5 to 15, with education levels that seemed to span everything from complete illiteracy to surprising sophistication. Eleanor stood at the front of the room and tried to remember how to breathe. "Good morning," she said, and her voice only shook a little. "My name is Miss Hale. I'm your new teacher." A boy in the back, maybe 13, with shoulders already broadening toward manhood, raised his hand. "Yes? You the one who quit working for Carlyle?" The room went silent. Eleanor could lie, could deflect, could establish authority by refusing to answer personal questions. Instead, she said, "Yes, I am." "Why?" "Because I wanted to teach here instead." "Here?" The boy looked around the shabby room like she'd lost her mind. "This place is falling apart." "I know, but it's ours, and that matters more than fancy furniture." The boy considered that, then nodded slowly and put his hand down. Eleanor felt something ease in her chest. She spent the first hour just assessing where everyone was. Reading levels, arithmetic skills, basic knowledge. The range was staggering. The oldest students could barely write their names. The youngest ones were reading at levels that would have impressed her Boston colleagues. By lunchtime, she had a splitting headache and no idea how she was going to teach 17 children of wildly different abilities in one room with limited supplies. But she also had their attention. And for now, that felt like enough. The children scattered at noon, some running home for lunch, others pulling out packages wrapped in cloth and eating in the schoolyard. Eleanor sat at her desk with the bread Sarah had left and tried to organize her thoughts into something resembling a teaching plan. The door opened. Jonah stepped inside, carrying a crate of books. Eleanor's heart did something complicated. "Thought you might need these," he said, setting the crate on her desk. "Found them in my mother's attic. She taught school before she married my father. Said you could have whatever's useful." Eleanor looked through the books, primers, readers, an atlas that was probably 15 years out of date, but still showed where things were. "This is... Thank you. Really. How'd it go this morning?" "Ask me in a week when I haven't scared them all away." Jonah almost smiled. "You won't scare them. You're too stubborn to let them leave." "That's not exactly a teaching qualification." "It is out here." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, and Eleanor could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them. The kiss in this same room 3 nights ago, the lawsuit waiting like a guillotine, the impossible mathematics of $500 in 3 weeks. "I heard about the court summons," Jonah said quietly. "Of course you did. Small town. Sarah's husband came by the ranch yesterday, said Carlisle's claiming 500 now instead of 3. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "He's adding charges, trying to make it hurt more." "It's working, isn't it?" "Yes." Jonah moved closer, and Eleanor could see the frustration carved into his face. "Eleanor, please, let me help. I can get the money." "How? By mortgaging the ranch? By putting your family in debt because I made a stupid choice?" "It wasn't stupid. It was impulsive and naive and exactly the kind of thing someone with no real understanding of this territory would do." Eleanor heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. "I thought I could just walk away from a contract because I didn't like the terms. I thought principle mattered more than practicality. And now I'm going to lose everything because I was too proud to see reality." "You're not going to lose everything. You don't know that. I know you're not facing this alone." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the certainty that radiated from his solid presence. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Richard Carlisle's cruel smile and the typed words on expensive paper. $500, 3 weeks. "I need to get back to work," she said, turning away from him. "The children will be back soon." Jonah stood there for another moment, and Eleanor could feel him wanting to argue, wanting to push. Then he sighed and headed for the door. "I'm not giving up on you," he said quietly. even if you've given up on yourself." Then he was gone, and Eleanor was alone with Ruth's books and her own inadequacy. The afternoon was chaos. Two of the younger children got into a fight over a pencil. One of the older girls burst into tears when Eleanor asked her to read aloud, and it became clear she couldn't. A boy threw up in the corner, and Eleanor had to clean it while keeping the other 16 students occupied. By 3 o'clock, when she finally dismissed them, Eleanor was exhausted in ways she hadn't known were possible. She stayed late, organizing books, planning lessons, trying to create some structure out of the mess. The sun was setting by the time she locked the schoolhouse door and started walking back to the Mitchells. She'd made it maybe half a mile when the riders appeared. 3 men, all of them carrying rifles, all of them wearing expressions that made Eleanor's stomach drop. She recognized one of them, Henderson, Carlisle's foreman, the same man who'd driven her to town that first day. They blocked the road, and Henderson dismounted slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice flat. "Mr. Carlisle would like a word." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "I have nothing to say to Mr. Carlisle. Wasn't asking if you wanted to talk. Was telling you he wants to." "And if I refuse?" Henderson shrugged. "Then we'll have to insist." Eleanor looked at the other 2 men, both still mounted, both watching her with the kind of detachment that suggested they'd done this before and would do it again. She was alone on an empty road with 3 armed men working for a man who'd already shown he didn't care about fairness or decency. "Where?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "His office, in town. He's there now, waiting." Eleanor calculated distances, options, chances of running. All of them ended badly. "Fine," she said, "but I'm walking. You can tell him I'll be there within the hour." Henderson smiled, and it wasn't kind. "We'll give you a ride. Make sure you don't get lost on the way." One of the other men dismounted and grabbed Eleanor's arm before she could protest. His grip was iron, and when she tried to pull away, he just tightened his hold. "Don't make this difficult," Henderson said. "We're just delivering you. Nothing more." They put her on a horse between 2 of them and rode into Forsyth as the sun finished setting. People on the street watched them pass. Eleanor could see faces in windows, shadows in doorways, but no one moved to help. Carlisle's office was in the back of the bank building, a room that smelled like cigars and leather. He was sitting behind a massive desk when they brought her in, and he didn't stand when she entered. Henderson pushed her into a chair. "She's here." "Thank you, wait outside." The 3 men left, closing the door behind them. Eleanor was alone with Carlisle for the first time since she'd handed him her resignation. He studied her for a long moment, and the look on his face made her skin crawl. "You've made quite an impression on this little town," he said finally. "The brave schoolteacher who stood up to the big bad rancher. Very romantic." Eleanor said nothing. "But romance doesn't pay bills, Miss Hale, and it certainly doesn't pay legal judgments." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a document. "I've been doing some research. You have no assets, no family to borrow from, no collateral for loans. You're functionally destitute. If you brought me here to gloat, I brought you here to offer you a solution." That stopped her. "What kind of solution?" Carlisle leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Drop the teaching position. Come back to work for me. Fulfill your original contract. I'll withdraw the lawsuit." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. You're a good teacher. My children liked you, and I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to overlook this entire unfortunate incident if you're willing to admit you made a mistake." "I didn't make a mistake." "No?" Carlisle's smile sharpened. "Then explain to me how you're going to pay $500 in 3 weeks. Explain how you're going to afford a lawyer, travel to Helena, mount any kind of defense. Explain how you're going to survive when I win, and I will win, and garnish every penny you earn for the next decade." Eleanor's hands were shaking in her lap. She curled them into fists to hide it. "Or," Carlisle continued, his voice almost gentle now, "you could simply acknowledge reality. Come back to work. Resume teaching my children. We forget this ever happened, and you go on with your life. No debt, no judgment, no consequences. Except I'd be admitting you were right. Is your pride really worth $500? Eleanor thought about the schoolhouse. About 17 children with wildly different abilities and the same desperate need to learn. About Sarah's bread and Ruth's books and Jonah's steady presence. She thought about what it would mean to go back to Carlisle's house, to teach his children while knowing what he was, to live under his control, his rules, his suffocating certainty that he owned everything and everyone. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is." Carlisle's expression hardened. "Then you're a fool." "Maybe, but I'm a fool who can sleep at night." "Can you? Because I wonder how well you'll sleep when you're homeless and unemployed and every door in this territory is closed to you." He stood, moving around the desk to stand over her. "I have influence, Miss Hale, real influence. One word from me and no school will hire you. No family will take you in. You'll be finished." Eleanor stood to face him, refusing to let him tower over her. "Then I'll be finished on my own terms." "Brave words. Let's see if you still feel that way in 3 weeks." He walked to the door and opened it. Henderson appeared immediately. "Take Miss Hale back to town. Make sure she arrives safely." The false courtesy made Eleanor's skin crawl, but she walked out with her head high, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. They left her on the street in front of the general store. Henderson tipped his hat mockingly and rode off with his men. Eleanor stood there shaking, trying to process what had just happened. Carlisle had offered her an out, a way to make all of this go away, and she'd refused. "Eleanor?" She turned to find Thomas Mitchell standing behind her, concern written all over his face. "Are you all right? Someone saw Carlisle's men take you." "I'm fine. He just wanted to talk." "About what?" Eleanor felt tears threaten and blinked them back viciously. "He offered to drop the lawsuit if I came back to work for him." Thomas's face darkened. "That bastard. What did you say?" "I said no." Thomas studied her for a long moment, then put a hand on her shoulder. "Come on. Sarah's got supper ready. You can tell us everything." Eleanor let him lead her through the dark streets, too tired to argue, too overwhelmed to think. At the Mitchell house, Sarah took one look at her face and pulled her into a fierce hug. "We're going to fight this," Sarah said. "All of us. Together." "With what money? What lawyer?" "I used to practice law," Thomas said quietly, "before I came west. I'm not licensed in Montana Territory, but I can help you prepare a defense. Research the statutes, find precedents." "That's not enough. It's what we have. So it'll have to be enough." They sat around the kitchen table until midnight, Thomas reading through the lawsuit, Sarah taking notes, Eleanor trying to remember every detail of her contract with Carlisle. "He's inflated the damages," Thomas said finally. "Significantly. The contract specifies 6 months' salary as penalty for breach. That's $240. The rest is fabricated. Emotional distress for the children, cost of replacement, loss of social standing. None of it will hold up in court." "But we still have to prove that," Eleanor said, "in front of a judge who's probably been to dinner at Carlisle's house." "Maybe, but the law is the law. And if we can show the charges are baseless, even a friendly judge will have to dismiss some of them." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the same quiet confidence that radiated from his tired face. But all she could think about was Carlisle's certainty, his absolute conviction that he would win. That night, alone in the small room off the kitchen, Eleanor pulled out paper and started writing. She wrote to her former colleagues in Boston, asking if any of them knew lawyers who worked in the territories. She wrote to the Territorial Education Board, explaining the situation and asking for guidance. She wrote to everyone she could think of who might have advice or connections or even just sympathy. Then she wrote to Jonah. The letter started 3 different ways before she finally settled on honesty. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to fight someone with this much power. And I'm terrified that choosing principle over pragmatism was the stupidest decision I've ever made. But I can't go back. I can't live under his control, even if refusing means I lose everything. So I'm asking, not for money, not for rescue, just for you to tell me I'm not insane. That standing up for myself is worth the cost. That somewhere in all this mess, I made at least one choice that was right, even if everything else falls apart." She signed it, sealed it, and left it on the kitchen table for Sarah to mail in the morning. Then she lay in the dark and tried to imagine what 3 weeks from now would look like. The images that came were all disaster. The second week of school was harder than the first. Word had spread about Carlisle's lawsuit, and parents started pulling their children out. Not all of them. Sarah's 4 remained, and a handful of others whose families clearly didn't care what Carlisle thought, but enough that Eleanor's 17 students dwindled to 11. "It'll get worse," Sarah said apologetically. "Some folks are too scared of Carlisle to risk crossing him." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because it's not fair. These children need you." "Fair doesn't seem to matter much out here." Sarah squeezed her hand. "It matters. It just takes longer to show up." Eleanor tried to focus on the students she still had. She reorganized lessons, combined age groups, found creative ways to teach multiple subjects simultaneously. The children responded with surprising enthusiasm. Maybe they sensed her desperation, or maybe they just appreciated someone who actually cared whether they learned. Either way, it kept her from drowning in anxiety about the lawsuit. Jonah came by every afternoon after the children left. He'd fix whatever needed fixing: a broken window latch, a door that wouldn't close properly, the stove that kept smoking. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. His presence was enough. One evening, as he was packing up his tools, Eleanor finally worked up the courage to ask, "Did you get my letter?" Jonah's hand stilled on the hammer. "Yeah." "And?" He turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "You're not insane. You're the bravest person I know, and you made the right choice. Even if it costs me everything, especially then." Eleanor felt tears threaten. "I'm scared. I know. What if Thomas can't find a defense? What if the judge rules against me anyway? Then we'll deal with it together." "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Jonah crossed the room to her, and his hands were gentle when they cupped her face. "Eleanor, I watched my father fight Carlisle for 10 years. Watched him lose in court over and over. Watched him pour money and energy and hope into a system that was rigged against him from the start. And you know what? He never regretted it. Not once. Because he knew standing up for what's right matters more than winning. Your father's dead." The words came out harsher than she intended, and Jonah flinched. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said quickly. "I didn't mean—" "No, you're right. He died fighting, but he died free. And that mattered to him more than living under Carlisle's thumb." Eleanor leaned into Jonah's touch, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I don't want to die fighting. I just want to teach." "Then that's what you'll do, no matter what happens in court. You can't promise that. Watch me." He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, and Eleanor let herself get lost in it. Let herself forget for just a moment about lawsuits and judgments and impossible debts. When they pulled apart, Jonah rested his forehead against hers. 3 weeks, he said quietly. "I know. We'll get through it." Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the same certainty that seemed to come so naturally to him. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was the courtroom and Helena and Carlisle's lawyer tearing her apart piece by piece. The break came from an unexpected direction. 2 weeks before the trial, a man arrived in Forsyth on the afternoon stagecoach. He was maybe 50, well-dressed, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. He asked directions to the schoolhouse. Eleanor was in the middle of teaching fractions when he knocked. She opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand. "Miss Eleanor Hale?" "Yes?" "My name is James Whitaker. I'm an attorney from Helena. I understand you're being sued by Richard Carlisle." Eleanor's heart started pounding. "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know when powerful men abuse the legal system to intimidate working women." He glanced past her at the children, watching with open curiosity. "Could we speak privately?" Eleanor dismissed the children early and invited Whitaker inside. He looked around the shabby schoolhouse with the same expression she'd probably worn her first day, part horror, part grudging admiration. "You left a position at the Carlisle estate to teach here," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" Eleanor thought about all the careful explanations she'd rehearsed, about contracts and principles, and the importance of independence. Instead, she said, "Because I couldn't stomach working for him anymore." Whitaker smiled, and it was the first genuine warmth she'd seen from him. "Good answer. Most people lie about their motives. Makes my job harder." "What exactly is your job?" "Taking cases like yours. Carlisle's been using the courts to bully people for years. Most of them can't afford to fight back, so he wins by default. But every once in a while, someone stands up to him, and when they do, I make sure they have representation. Eleanor felt something fragile and dangerous flutter in her chest. Hope. I can't pay you, she said quickly. I barely have enough to survive until the trial. I'm not asking for payment. I'm asking for permission to destroy Carlisle's case so thoroughly he'll think twice before trying this again. Why would you do that? Whitaker's expression hardened. Because 10 years ago, Carlisle filed a similar suit against a woman in Billings, a seamstress who'd refused to make his wife a dress because he owed her for previous work. He sued her for defamation and breach of contract. She couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't mount a defense. The court ruled against her. She lost her shop, her home, everything. 6 months later, she killed herself. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Carlisle's pattern is clear, Whitaker continued. He finds people he considers beneath him, uses his wealth and influence to crush them, and walks away without consequences. I've been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back, and according to Thomas Mitchell's letter, you might be that person. Thomas wrote to you? Last week. Explained the situation, asked if I knew anyone who might help. Whitaker set his briefcase on Eleanor's desk and pulled out a folder. I've been reviewing Carlisle's complaint. It's garbage. Inflated damages, fabricated claims, emotional manipulation masquerading as legal argument. A first-year law student could tear it apart. Then why hasn't anyone? Because Carlisle hires the best lawyers money can buy, and most defendants can't afford to fight them. But you won't be most defendants. You'll have me. Eleanor sat down heavily on one of the student benches. What do you need from me? Everything, your contract, correspondence with Carlisle, witnesses who can testify to what happened, and most importantly, your willingness to stand up in court and tell the truth no matter how uncomfortable. I can do that. Even if Carlisle's lawyer tries to destroy your character, suggests improper relationships, accuses you of moral failings. Eleanor thought about Jonah's kiss in this schoolhouse, about the way people already talked when they saw them together. Yes, she said. Even then. Whitaker studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Then we have a fighting chance. They worked until dark. Whitaker taking notes, asking questions, building the framework of a defense. When he finally left, promising to return in a week, Eleanor sat alone in the empty schoolhouse and let herself cry. Not from fear this time. From relief. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a real lawyer, a real chance, and maybe, just maybe, she was going to survive this after all. The news spread through town overnight. By the next morning, parents who'd pulled their children were reconsidering. By afternoon, Eleanor had 14 students again. By the end of the week, she was back to 17, plus 2 new ones whose families had just moved to the area. They smell blood in the water, Sarah said, grinning. Carlisle's blood. People are starting to think you might actually win. We haven't won yet. No, but you're fighting, and out here that's almost as good. The final week before the trial passed in a blur of preparation. Whitaker returned with another lawyer, a woman named Catherine Price, who specialized in contract law and had the kind of sharp intelligence that made Eleanor grateful they were on the same side. They rehearsed testimony, reviewed documents, built arguments and tore them apart and built them again stronger. And through it all, Jonah was there, not interfering, not taking over, just present, steady, real. The night before they left for Helena, Eleanor found him in the schoolhouse after everyone else had gone. He was sitting on her desk, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Nervous? She asked. Terrified. Eleanor moved to stand beside him. Me too. You don't look it. I'm a good liar when I need to be. Jonah smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Eleanor, if this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, if Carlisle wins and you can't pay the judgment, he stopped, swallowing hard. I meant what I said. About helping. About being here. I know. Do you? Because I need you to understand. He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. I've been alone my whole life. Even when I was surrounded by family, I was alone. And then you showed up, lost and stubborn, and completely unsuited for this place, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. Eleanor felt tears threaten. Jonah, I'm not good at words, not like you. But I need you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, you changed everything. You changed me, and I'm not letting you face this alone." Eleanor kissed him then, fierce and desperate, pouring everything she couldn't say into the contact. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking. "We're going to win," she whispered. "How do you know?" "Because the alternative is unacceptable." Jonah laughed, and it sounded like relief and terror mixed together. "That's not how the world works." "Then we'll make it work differently." They stayed in the schoolhouse until full dark, holding each other, not talking, just being present for what might be the last peaceful moment before everything changed. And when Eleanor finally walked back to the Mitchell's house to pack for Helena, she carried with her the absolute certainty that whatever happened in that courtroom, she'd already won the thing that mattered most. She'd found home, found family, found herself. And Richard Carlyle, with all his money and influence and cruel certainty, couldn't take that away. Not without a fight. The courtroom in Helena was smaller than Eleanor expected, and colder. She sat between Whitaker and Catherine Price at a scarred wooden table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Across the aisle, Richard Carlyle sat flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits, looking like a man who'd already won and was just waiting for formality to catch up with reality. The judge, a man named Harlan Pierce, maybe 60, with wire-rimmed glasses and the expression of someone who'd heard every excuse and believed none of them, entered precisely at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. Eleanor's legs barely held her. "Be seated," Judge Pierce said, settling into his chair. "We're here on the matter of Carlyle versus Hale, breach of contract. Mr. Thornton, you're representing the plaintiff?" One of Carlyle's lawyers stood, tall, silver-haired, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never losing. "I am, Your Honor, Stanford Thornton of Thornton and Associates. And for the defense?" Whitaker rose smoothly. "James Whitaker, Your Honor, with co-counsel Catherine Price." Judge Pierce's eyebrows rose slightly. "Whitaker, didn't expect to see you on a case like this." "I go where I'm needed, Your Honor." "Apparently." Pierce shuffled papers on his desk. "All right. Mr. Thornton, this is your complaint. Make your case." What followed was 2 hours of methodical destruction. Thornton presented Eleanor's contract, highlighting every clause she'd broken. He called Victoria Carlyle to the stand, who testified with tears in her eyes about how the children had suffered without proper instruction. He brought in the replacement governess, who claimed she'd had to work twice as hard to undo the damage Eleanor's sudden departure had caused. And through it all, Carlyle sat watching Eleanor with a small smile that said he'd warned her this would happen. Eleanor felt herself shrinking with each piece of evidence, each carefully constructed argument. She'd known this would be hard, but the reality of sitting in a courtroom while her character was systematically dismantled was worse than anything she'd imagined. When Thornton finally rested his case, Judge Pierce looked at Whitaker. "Your turn, counselor." Whitaker stood, and something in his posture made Eleanor sit up straighter. "Your Honor, my client doesn't dispute that she left Mr. Carlyle's employment. What she disputes is the characterization of that departure as malicious breach of contract, and more specifically, the grossly inflated damages Mr. Carlyle is claiming. The damages are enumerated in the complaint. The damages are fabricated, Your Honor. With your permission, I'd like to walk through them one by one." Pierce waved a hand. "Proceed." What followed was a masterclass in legal precision. Whitaker took apart every single damage claim, showing how most of them weren't supported by the contract language, how others were duplicative, how the emotional distress claims had no basis in territorial law. "The contract specifies 6 months' salary as the penalty for breach," Whitaker said. "That's $240. Everything else Mr. Carlyle is claiming, replacement costs, emotional damages, loss of social standing, is either already covered by that penalty or isn't compensable under the law. He's trying to turn a straightforward contract dispute into a morality play where he gets to punish Miss Hale for having the audacity to choose different employment." Thornton objected. "That's inflammatory." "It's accurate," Whitaker shot back. "And I can prove it. I'd like to call Richard Carlyle to the stand." The courtroom went silent. Carlyle's face darkened, but he stood and moved to the witness box. He was sworn in, sat down, and fixed Whitaker with a look that could have frozen water. "Mr. Carlyle," Whitaker began conversationally, "how long have you lived in Montana Territory?" 15 years. "And in that time you've accumulated significant land holdings?" I've been successful, yes. Including the property currently occupied by the Reed family? Carlyle's jaw tightened. That property belongs to me. The Reed family disputes that claim. The Reed family is wrong. Have you filed legal action against them to remove them from the property? Multiple times. And how many times have you won those cases? Carlyle shifted slightly. The courts have been inconsistent. Inconsistent? Meaning you've lost as many as you've won? Meaning the legal process is ongoing. Whitaker pulled a document from his folder. I have here a petition filed by Jonah Reed last year, claiming that you've used intimidation, threats, and legal harassment to try to force his family off land they legally own. Did you file a countersuit in response to that petition? I defended my interest. Did you file a countersuit, yes or no? Yes. For how much? Carlyle's face went stony. $5,000. A murmur ran through the courtroom. $5,000, Whitaker repeated, for a petition that was dismissed on procedural grounds. That seems excessive, doesn't it? It was appropriate to the damages, just like $500 is appropriate for a governess leaving your employment. Thornton shot to his feet. Objection! The Reed case has no bearing on this proceeding. It establishes a pattern, Your Honor, Whitaker said calmly. Mr. Carlyle uses the legal system as a weapon. He files suits with inflated damages designed not to seek fair compensation, but to financially destroy anyone who crosses him. Miss Hale isn't the first. She's just the latest. Judge Pierce studied Carlyle for a long moment. I'll allow it. Continue, Mr. Whitaker. Whitaker moved closer to the witness box. Mr. Carlyle, did you offer to drop this lawsuit if Miss Hale returned to work for you? Carlyle hesitated. I offered her the opportunity to rectify her mistake. Yes or no? Did you offer to drop the lawsuit if she came back? Yes? So this isn't really about damages at all, is it? It's about control. You wanted to force her back into your employment by threatening financial ruin. I wanted her to honor her contract. You wanted her to be afraid of you. Whitaker's voice was quiet now, but it carried. Just like you want the Reeds to be afraid. Just like you want this entire territory to know that crossing Richard Carlyle means losing everything. That's not... How many lawsuits have you filed in the last 10 years? Carlyle's mouth snapped shut. I'll tell you, Whitaker said. 43. 43 separate legal actions against people who work for you, do business with you, or simply have the misfortune of owning something you want. And in every single case, you've claimed damages far exceeding any actual harm. You're not seeking justice, Mr. Carlyle. You're seeking submission. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Pierce leaned forward. Mr. Carlyle, is this true? 43 lawsuits? Carlyle's face was red now, fury barely contained. I have every right to protect my interests. Answer the question. Have you filed that many suits? I haven't counted. I have, Whitaker said, pulling out another document. Court records, public information, all available for Your Honor's review. Pierce held out his hand and Whitaker passed him the papers. The judge read in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Carlyle, step down. Mr. Thornton, approach the bench. Carlyle returned to his seat, and Eleanor could see his hand shaking with barely suppressed rage. Thornton and Whitaker both moved to the judge's desk, where a whispered conversation happened that Eleanor couldn't hear. When they returned to their tables, Thornton looked like he'd been punched. We're going to take a recess, Judge Pierce announced. 1 hour. When we return, I expect both parties to be prepared to discuss settlement. The gavel came down. Eleanor sat frozen as the courtroom emptied around her. What just happened? She finally asked. Whitaker was gathering his papers, but he was smiling. We won. We haven't won anything yet. Trust me, we won. He glanced at Carlyle, who was in heated conversation with his lawyers. Pierce just told Thornton that if this case goes forward, he's going to rule on the pattern of abuse, not just the contract dispute. And if he does that, Carlyle's entire legal strategy for the last decade gets exposed. Every case, every inflated claim, all of it becomes public record. Catherine leaned in. Carlyle can't afford that kind of scrutiny. He'll settle. For how much? That's what we're about to find out. The hour passed in a blur. Eleanor walked the halls of the courthouse with Jonah, who'd sat in the back row through the entire proceeding, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything. Whitaker did it all. You stood up. You didn't back down when Carlyle tried to intimidate you. That's everything." Eleanor leaned against the wall, exhausted. "Is it over?" "Almost." When they reconvened, Thornton stood immediately. "Your Honor, my client is willing to settle. We propose Miss Hale pay the contractually specified penalty of $240 to be paid in installments over 12 months. In exchange, all other claims are dropped." Eleanor felt her heart stop. $240. Still impossible, but not the crushing weight of $500. "Miss Hale?" Judge Pierce looked at her. "Do you accept these terms?" Eleanor looked at Whitaker, who nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then this case is settled. Miss Hale, you have 12 months to pay Mr. Carlyle $240. Failure to do so will result in judgment being entered against you for the full amount. Do you understand?" "I do." "Good. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down again, and it was over. Eleanor stood on shaking legs as the courtroom emptied. Carlyle left without looking at her, his lawyers hurrying him out like he might say something that would make things worse. Whitaker shook her hand firmly. "Congratulations, Miss Hale. You just beat one of the most powerful men in Montana Territory." "I didn't beat him. I just survived him." "Out here, that's the same thing." Catherine hugged her, quick and professional. "If he gives you any trouble about the payment schedule, you let us know." "I will. Thank you. Both of you. I don't know how to... "Don't thank us yet," Whitaker said. "You've still got to pay the $240. That going to be a problem?" Eleanor did quick math in her head. $20 a month for 12 months. On her teaching salary of $30 a month, that left her $10 to live on. It was impossible. It was barely survival, but it was hers. "I'll manage," she said. Whitaker studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you will." They left Helena that afternoon, Eleanor and Jonah riding together in a wagon borrowed from the Mitchells. The sky was clear, and the territory spread out around them in endless variations of brown and green and gray. $240, Eleanor said, staring at the horizon. $20 a month. You'll make it work. How? I'll be living on $10 a month. That's not enough for anything. Then you'll find another way. You're good at that. Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to feel the same calm certainty that seemed to come so naturally to Jonah. But all she could think about was how close she'd come to losing everything, how one man's vindictiveness had nearly destroyed her entire life. "What if I can't pay?" she asked quietly. "What if something happens? I get sick, or the school closes, or... Then we'll deal with it. Together." There was that word again, together. Eleanor looked at Jonah, really looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, hands steady on the reins, jaw set in the same stubborn line she'd first seen the night he'd carried her trunk through the snow. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why are you still here? You've known me for 2 months. You've watched me make one stupid decision after another. I'm broke, I'm in debt, I'm probably going to struggle for years just to break even. Why do you keep showing up?" Jonah was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Because the first night you stayed at the ranch, you helped Clara with the baby when you didn't have to. Because you hauled firewood until your hands bled and never complained. Because you chose principle over safety, even when safety was the smart choice." He glanced at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. "Because you're the first person I've met in 10 years who looks at this territory and sees possibility instead of limitation. And because when I'm around you, I remember what it feels like to want something more than just survival." Eleanor felt tears slip down her face, unexpected and unstoppable. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I don't know if I can do this." "You can, and you will, because that's who you are." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking over uneven ground, the mountains watching from the distance. "Jonah?" Eleanor said finally. "Yeah? What happens now?" He thought about that. "Now you teach. You pay off your debt. You build a life that's yours. And somewhere in there, if you want, maybe we figure out what we are to each other. What if I already know? Jonah pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. Then tell me. Eleanor reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. You're home. You're the place I was trying to get to when that stagecoach dropped me in the wrong spot. Except it wasn't wrong at all. It was exactly right. Just took me a while to see it. Jonah kissed her then, slow and careful, like she was something precious that might break. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. $240, he said quietly. 12 months. We'll figure it out. We. Yeah, we. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Okay, we. They made it back to Forsyth just before dark. Sarah was waiting on the porch, and when she saw Eleanor's face, she let out a whoop that probably woke half the town. You won! We settled. Same thing. Come on, tell me everything. Eleanor told the story 3 times that night. Once to Sarah and Thomas, once to the collected crowd that appeared in the Mitchell kitchen, and once more to the children the next morning when she returned to the schoolhouse. They listened with wide eyes, asking questions, wanting to know every detail about the judge and the lawyers, and whether Carlisle had looked mad when he lost. He looked like a man who wasn't used to losing, Eleanor said carefully. But he's going to have to get used to it, because people like us, we don't give up just because something's hard. One of the older boys raised his hand. Miss Hale, are you staying? As long as you'll have me. Even with the debt? Even with the debt. The boy nodded, satisfied. Good. You're the best teacher we've had. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. You've only had me for 3 weeks. Exactly. And you're still here. That makes you the best. She taught that day with something close to joy, watching her students work through problems, seeing them start to trust that she wouldn't disappear the way other teachers had. After they left, Eleanor stayed late organizing books. She'd just finished when Jonah appeared in the doorway with Ruth. Ma wanted to see the school, he said. Ruth walked through slowly, taking in the patched walls and fixed roof and wobbling desks that had been reinforced with scrap wood. It's not much, Eleanor said apologetically. It's perfect, Ruth replied. You've made something good here. I've barely started. Doesn't matter. You chose this place over comfort, chose these children over security. That's what makes it perfect. Ruth pulled an envelope from her pocket and handed it to Eleanor. Inside was money. Eleanor counted quickly, $50. I can't accept this. You can and you will. It's from the ranch. From all of us. David, Samuel, Clara, me. Jonah tried to contribute, but we told him he'd already done enough with the roof. Ruth's smile was small, but genuine. We take care of our own, and you're one of us now, whether you planned it or not. Eleanor stared at the money, overwhelmed. Ruth, this is 2.5 months of payments. I know, that's the point. You'll pay it to Carlisle, and you'll have a little breathing room to figure out the rest. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just teach these kids and stop trying to do everything alone. Ruth left before Eleanor could argue, and Jonah stayed behind, watching her with that quiet intensity that still made her heart race. You knew about this, Eleanor said. Ma's idea. I just didn't stop her. Jonah, don't thank me. Thank her. She's the one who decided you were worth fighting for. Eleanor tucked the money into her pocket, feeling its weight like a promise. I'm going to pay her back. She doesn't want you to. I don't care. I'm paying her back. Jonah smiled. Stubborn. You keep saying that like it's a bad thing. It's not. It's my favorite thing about you. They walked back to the Mitchell house together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible for something as harsh as Montana territory. The months that followed were the hardest of Eleanor's life. She paid Carlisle $20 every month without fail, leaving her $10 to live on. Sarah refused to take money for room and board, which Eleanor hated and appreciated in equal measure. She ate simply, wore the same 3 dresses in rotation, and learned to make a single bar of soap last week's. But she also watched her students grow, saw them start to believe that education mattered, that they could be more than what this hard place demanded. She taught them reading and arithmetic and geography, but she also taught them that standing up for yourself was worth the cost, even when the cost felt unbearable. In the spring, 3 more families moved to the area, and her classroom swelled to 23 students. She had to combine age groups even more creatively, but the challenge was exhilarating rather than crushing. Jonah came by every week, always with some excuse. A broken desk that needed fixing, a window that wouldn't open, firewood that needed stacking. They never talked about what they were to each other, but the answer was written in every touch, every look, every quiet moment they stole together. By summer, Eleanor had paid off half her debt. By fall, 2/3. And on a cold December morning, exactly 12 months after the settlement, she walked into Richard Carlisle's office in Forsyth and placed the final $20 on his desk. He looked at the money, then at her, and something complicated crossed his face. "You actually did it," he said. "I told you I would." "Most people don't. They make promises, miss payments, end up in default. I was counting on that." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her chest. "You wanted me to fail. I wanted you to understand that choices have consequences." Carlyle picked up the money, counted it slowly. "But I underestimated you. Won't make that mistake again." "Good, because I'm not going anywhere." Carlyle studied her for a long moment, then did something Eleanor never expected. He smiled. Not the cruel smile she'd seen in court, not the condescending expression from the first time they'd met. Something almost like respect. "You're tougher than you look, Miss Hale." "I had to be." "Yes, you did." He stood and held out his hand. "We're settled, legally and personally. I hope your school continues to thrive." Eleanor stared at his outstretched hand, remembering every threat, every cruel word, every moment she'd been terrified he would destroy her. Then she shook it. Because holding grudges was exhausting, and she had better things to do with her energy. She walked out of that office into December sunshine and felt lighter than she had in a year. Jonah was waiting outside, leaning against the wagon. "Done?" he asked. "Done." "How do you feel?" Eleanor thought about that. "Free." "Good, because I have a question." "What kind of question?" Jonah reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Eleanor's heart stopped. "I know this isn't the right time," he said, his voice rough with nerves. "You've just finished paying off a debt. You're still getting established. The school needs you, and I don't want to... I'm not trying to..." He stopped, frustrated with himself. "I'm terrible at this." Eleanor took the box from his shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple gold, no stone, just a band worn smooth with age. "It was my mother's," Jonah said, "from before my father died. She said I should give it to someone who understands that love isn't about making things easy. It's about choosing to show up, even when everything's hard." Eleanor felt tears slip down her face. "I'm not asking you to stop teaching," Jonah continued. "I'm not asking you to change anything about who you are. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to build a life with me, here, together, however that looks." Eleanor looked at this man who'd showed up the night she'd walked alone into darkness, who'd fixed her roof without being asked, who'd stood beside her through a lawsuit and debt, and every moment she'd been certain she would fail. "Yes," she said. Jonah's face transformed. "Yes?" "Yes. To all of it. To you, to us, to building something together that's ours." He kissed her right there on the street in front of the bank, and Eleanor didn't care who saw. When they pulled apart, Jonah slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "We'll get married in the schoolhouse," Eleanor said. "If that's all right." "Why the schoolhouse?" "Because it's where I started believing I belonged here, where I stopped running from hard things and started running toward them." She looked up at him, this impossible man who'd appeared in her life by accident and become everything on purpose. "It's where I found home." Jonah pulled her close, his arms solid and warm and real. "Then the schoolhouse it is." They married in the spring, with the whole town crammed into that small building with the patched walls and fixed roof. Sarah cried. Ruth smiled. The children sang a song they'd practiced for weeks, slightly off-key, but full of genuine joy. And when Eleanor and Jonah stood at the front of the room, promising to choose each other through whatever came next, Eleanor thought about the stagecoach driver who'd made a mistake 2 years ago. She'd never thanked him for dropping her in the wrong place. Maybe someday she would. The years that followed weren't easy. Montana Territory didn't get easier just because you'd survived it once. Winters were still brutal, money was still tight, and the school still needed constant repairs. But Eleanor taught generation after generation of children who grew up believing that education and principle mattered more than comfort. Some of them left for universities back east. Some stayed and became ranchers and shopkeepers and parents who demanded good schools for their own children. The schoolhouse expanded twice, once when enrollment hit 40, and again when it reached 60. Each time, Jonah was there with his tools and his steady hands, building walls that would hold. Ruth lived to see her great-grandchildren learn to read in Eleanor's classroom. Clara recovered her strength and became one of Eleanor's most vocal advocates on the school board. Even David found his footing, eventually taking over the ranch when Jonah decided he preferred carpentry to cattle. Carlisle died of a heart attack 5 years after the settlement. His will revealed that he'd left the disputed land to the Reed family, along with a note that simply said, "You earned it." Eleanor never knew if that was respect or resignation, and she decided it didn't matter. What mattered was that the ranch stayed in the family, that the school kept growing, that the town of Forsyth became known throughout the territory as the place where the school teacher had stood up to Richard Carlisle and won. What mattered was that Eleanor woke up every morning beside a man who'd chosen her when she was lost and broken and determined, and who kept choosing her through every day after. What mattered was that the wrong destination had become the right life. On a summer afternoon 20 years after that first snowstorm, Eleanor stood in the schoolhouse, the new, larger building with glass windows and real desks, watching her students file out for the day. Jonah appeared in the doorway, grayer now but still solid, still steady. "You ready?" he asked. "For what?" "To go home. It's been a long day." Eleanor looked around the classroom one more time, at the books on the shelves, the maps on the walls, the evidence of 2 decades of teaching and learning and growing. "I am home," she said. Jonah smiled. "I know, but there's supper waiting at the ranch, and I promised Ruth we'd be there before dark." Eleanor took his offered hand and they walked out together into the Montana sunshine. Behind them, the schoolhouse stood quiet and ready, waiting for tomorrow's students, tomorrow's lessons, tomorrow's proof that choosing the hard thing was sometimes the only choice worth making. And if you'd asked Eleanor in that moment whether she regretted getting on that stagecoach in Boston all those years ago, whether she wished the driver had taken her to the right place instead of the wrong one, she would have laughed, because there was no wrong place. There was only the place where you decided to stop running and start building. There was only the moment you realized that home wasn't something you found on a map. It was something you created from stubbornness and hope, and the willingness to stand up, even when standing up meant you might fall. And Eleanor had stood, had fallen, had gotten back up, and in doing so, had built a life that was messier and harder and more beautiful than anything she'd planned, which was exactly how it should be. Because the best things, the things worth keeping, were never the ones that came easy. They were the ones you fought for, bled for, chose over and over again, even when every rational part of your brain screamed that you should quit. Eleanor had learned that in a cold Montana winter, in a schoolhouse with rats and a leaking roof. She'd learned it from a man who showed up when she was lost and stayed when she was found. She'd learned it from children who believed in her before she believed in herself. And she'd carried that lesson through every hard day after, until hard became familiar, and familiar became home. That was the thing about mistakes, Eleanor thought, as she and Jonah rode toward the ranch where it had all started. Sometimes they weren't mistakes at all. Sometimes they were just life, giving you exactly what you needed in the last place you thought to look. And if you were brave enough to stay, stubborn enough to fight, and foolish enough to believe that love and principle could matter more than safety, sometimes, just sometimes, you gotta keep it.